Hey, what's up YouTube? So today I wanted to do a video about whether or not Nikon will survive and thrive into the next decade. So at first look, one of the biggest criticisms one could make about Nikon is that they are a very conservative company and they're kind of slow moving, and upon a deeper inspection into their history, you can see that Nikon has made pretty revolutionary changes at times, and they've also led the way and made some of the most incredible cameras over the last 50 years or so. And you could look at any of the Nikon F cameras, and even in the recent last 5 years or so, I mean, you have the D5, D500, D850, just incredible machines, and so to discount them very quickly would be a mistake. So I wanted to point out that in comparison to Nikon and their many years of history as a company, I am really nobody, and I don't expect that putting this out is going to really make a change directly upon Nikon, but hopefully by getting some of the thoughts into the rest of the photography community, that somehow those ideas will trickle up into Nikon's consciousness. Now, I'm not going to go into any of the financial details or anything like that. This is a big picture look at Nikon, its history, and where it's going as a company. I am going to do a list of some things that I think may help Nikon to stay on track into the future, and so we'll go to that as well. So the big question is will Nikon go bankrupt anytime soon? The short answer is no, probably not. To start with, they are owned by Mitsubishi. They're part of a much larger group. And even Nikon, the imaging division itself, makes all kinds of products such as microscopes, binoculars, scopes for guns, lenses for glasses, etc., etc. In doing this, the company spreads its liability far and wide, making all different types of products. And so even if there's a slowdown in one market, it makes it fairly secure for the rest of the group. So Nikon's already doing a pretty good job diversifying its investments and stuff like that, so I don't think that there's a whole lot of fear of the company going completely bankrupt. That said, the camera division itself could stand to use a little bit of improvement. The main factor that seems to be an issue for Nikon is that, in the 80s and 90s they made tons and tons of money on consumer cameras aimed at your average individual user and that sort of thing. However, the market for that has since dried up, being that most people now only buy cell phones, and Nikon didn't get into the cell phone market the same way that companies like Leica did with Huawei. The main criticism you'll see from the photo community about Nikon's unwillingness to adapt is generally directed at two decisions over the last 10 years or so. The first was its unwillingness to pursue video capability in its DSLRs and to fix an autofocus system that was lacking when it comes to video. The other was to avoid jumping quickly into mirrorless cameras. In my opinion, early implementation of either of these would have only been directed at a more entry-level point in the marketplace, a part of the marketplace that Nikon already knew all too well was dying. In many ways, I see them waiting a generation or two to let other companies deal with the growing pains of these new technologies as a smart move. This let Nikon concentrate on their professional imaging roots while discreetly developing their technologies. All of these hesitations are quickly being addressed as they now are adding a new pulse motor focusing mechanism for quieter autofocus during video. They have a whole line of first generation mirrorless cameras, and they've added eye detect autofocus quite recently as well. So along with this little bit of discourse on the company itself, I wanted to give some advice for what I think Nikon would need to do in order to stay relevant and to stay profitable into the next decade or so. My first suggestion would be that Nikon really needs to simplify the camera lineup. There's no need to have so many cameras available at any given time, and this only increases the amount of money needed for research and development, and there's just too many options on the market with too few differences between them. Along the same lines, I think it would be really helpful if Nikon would simplify their naming convention and make it something that can, last for 10, 20, 30 years and, to come, so that consumers are not easily confused by the line itself, and knowing the differences between one is not so difficult. Now, I think it's important for Nikon to not only diversify their investments by expanding their technologies, as they've done a pretty good job already, but also to consider becoming a smaller, more nimble company. It's important to manage investor expectations in the current economic climate, to eliminate greed in the system by cutting excess and things like that. Now that the low end of the market has dropped out, with people not buying consumer cameras anymore, the profit margins you could enjoy during the 80s and 90s are just not going to come back. So I think it would be really important for Nikon to keep investing in technologies that really push the boundaries of what they can do with imaging. They've already started doing this by developing, for example, the new Noct lens for the Z series cameras, and that lens may be far out of the reach of your everyday consumer. However, those technologies do trickle back down into the more entry-level and prosumer markets. Developing cameras such as the D850, for example, really does affect the lower-end cameras, in the years to come. So I think it would be really useful for Nikon, especially because Nikon has for so long relied on their professional side of the company. It would be really useful for them to develop technologies in, say, medium format cameras, for example, to realize the potential of the research they've already done. So, for example, I don't think that it would be a big stretch for Nikon to develop a medium format camera system using the same technologies from the D850, for example, and some of the lenses they've developed with the Z series, to basically, be able to put together a system in no time that can do, incredible things. And so I think it would be a useful way for them to push their boundaries of what they can do and to develop new technologies in that area, and also to bring back some brand loyalty and pride in the brand name for professionals. So, for example, I think a lot of high-end landscape photographers, fine art photographers, people like that would benefit greatly from a medium format camera, and it may cost a lot of money outside the abilities of most consumers. However, it does help push the brand's recognition in the field. So my next suggestion is that all lower end products should be completely capable for video. That is to say that they should have a completely articulating and flippable screen that can be used to monitor video from the front of the camera, IBIS, headphone and microphone jacks, completely silent autofocus ability with some type of face and eye detect. Mirrorless cameras also happen to be the perfect match to these technologies, as the autofocus is done directly on the sensor itself. All of these features are completely critical for proper video work, but all can also be compromises in the design of the camera for features such as weatherproofing. This means that the ideal features for a video-capable camera may make it not ideal as a camera for a professional landscape photographer, for example. This leads me to my next point. While I think Nikon should simplify its current lineup, it doesn't mean that they should stray away from having niche products meant for a select audience. They can and should make products that will sell in smaller numbers, but that fit the needs of the smaller market perfectly. These type of products are often invaluable to the progression of a brand or technology. Think outside the box and find out what creatives really want and need. While it's an important pursuit for lower-end cameras to become smaller, cameras for the higher end of the market tend to be used with larger and heavier lenses. Maintaining a larger form factor on these professional bodies not only helps maintaining longer battery charges, provides a more comfortable grip for longer periods of shooting, but also provides a better counterbalance to the larger, heavier lenses often used by these shooters. A proper vertical grip should be offered with any camera on the market. They are inexpensive for the company and consumer, easy to manufacture into even the smallest form factor cameras, and provide a much more flexible and capable product to the consumer. They are also a good opportunity for Nikon to make extra money on each camera model without the customer feeling like they're being taken advantage of. All vertical grips should enhance the feel and grip of the camera and should provide an exactly equal, in terms of feel and button dial placement, feel in comparison to the normal camera controls. A battery grip without controls is completely unacceptable. Go home with that nonsense, Nikon. All cameras on the market should offer dual memory cards. To do otherwise only limits the target market of willing buyers, doesn't cost much more to manufacture, and provides a much more capable product to any buyer. Even the smallest cameras on the market could easily fit dual SD card slots with no problem. Most professionals cannot take this risk, and I always argue that photos of once-in-a-lifetime vacations and photos of loved ones are even more valuable. I have a video about this here. Don't limit your target market over this, Nikon. And now that camera imaging sensors are becoming, much larger and providing, larger output files, I think it's very important that, from now on we use selectable sizes for RAW files in particular. If you're going to have large output cameras, it would be very helpful to be able to select that on every camera. They've already implemented that in the newest generation, the D850 for example, but I think it's important to make sure that they continue doing that. Alright guys, I don't know it all, but I have been shooting Nikon since about the time the digital age began. One of the hardest parts of this video for me has to do with crop sensors versus full frame, F-mount versus Z-mount, mirrorless versus DSLR, and what Nikon should do with its lineup. My views have been changing every year and with every product release. The truth is that Nikon's choices have already been made, for better or for worse, and so what I would have suggested is irrelevant. One truth that I do know and mentioned momentarily in the beginning of the video is that Nikon's lineup is overly complex, overcrowded, and often is not technically optimized. The best example of this is the new Z50 crop sensor camera utilizing the new Z-mount. This mount is between 30 to 50% larger than needed to cover this sensor. This means that this small entry-level camera will have lenses that are unnecessarily large, heavy, and more expensive, thus negating the inherent benefits of a crop sensor mirrorless camera. Product roadmaps have already been released and promises made to customers, but I encourage Nikon to focus their strategy moving forward. Look at the pros and cons of a technology and create product ecosystems that make sense. Look at a camera from the end user's perspective and tailor your offers accordingly. Crop sensor cameras are great for small, lightweight packages that cost the consumer less money, and also for sports or wildlife photographers who need the extra reach and speed provided. Now, one thing that Nikon's been good at for quite a while is the button layout system, and designing a system that's easily manipulated in the field to be able to be quick and responsive to the user's needs. Its menu systems are, so-so on that, and maybe after a little while of getting used to it, you don't really notice it. It could possibly use some improvement as well. But one thing that Nikon's definitely lacked on is its software integration with the cell phone and that sort of thing, and being able to provide a product for the entry-level market that more closely resembles the way that they use a cell phone, for example. The old school method of shooting onto a memory card, loading to a computer, and then manipulating and then uploading to the internet or for whatever other use you're going to use it for is fine for professionals, but it's very old school and unintuitive for the normal everyday user. So I think it's important to develop those systems to where the entry-level cameras are utilized in a similar way to a cell phone, for example. So I think that it could be a lot of benefit for them to improve their snap bridge capability, for being able to trigger remotely or to apply filters and upload to Instagram or whatever the case may be on the fly, to provide that user experience, especially to younger people who grew up with that new school workflow. Alright guys, that was a pretty interesting video for me to make. I had to really consider my opinions and thoughts on things and put together something that I think will be a benefit for you guys. If you stuck through to this point, I really appreciate that. Sorry for kind of cutting through different pieces together. But it was kind of a hard project to undertake. And so I hope you guys had a good Christmas and New Year's, and ready to start off 2020 on the right foot. If you enjoy my videos, please subscribe, and take care, guys.